The law of compensation states that you will be paid in proportion to the value that you can create for someone else. And value will always be determined by the quality of problem solved.
Sales skills is like a tool, but the efficiency of the tools that you use is based on the knowledge of what job you're doing. So
Right.
if I'm gonna hang a painting, I need a hammer and a nail, right? I don't need a screwdriver. But if I didn't realize that, I might pick up the screwdriver. And I think sales is the same thing.
The further up you go, the stronger the learning will be.
Mm.
Okay? The more involved the learning will be. The farther down you go, the less learning you're actually doing.
So, welcome back to another episode. Today we have the Gooch himself. So I'll give a bit of space for you to intro yourself shortly, but for everyone who doesn't know you, but we've kind of known each other or known of each other for probably a few years now. But this is actually the first time we've really sat down. So, yeah, this has been a long time coming, and I'm really excited about where this will go because I feel like we align a lot in our sort of thought processes and where we're going. So really excited to dig into this, man. So appreciate you being here. But let's dive in. So give the people what they want. Let's see who is Pierre. Like just break down a little bit. Give yourself an intro, man.
So, so I think that for those of you who do not know who I am, my name is Pierre. I'm based here in the beautiful city of Memphis, Tennessee. I've been in sales for around five years or so. I've been in all kinds of industries, done all kinds of things. And what I do in my spare time is I spend a good amount of time focusing in on human nature and change, learning, as well as a lot of weird stuff like magic and all those kinds of cool things. And those things kind of inform the way I think about sales and communication. And so whenever people talk to me, I'll inevitably try to think about, you know, what is being said and how does this relate to every other form of communication or way of speaking out there. And so my entire development journey has been trying to figure out why is this being said or done,
Mm.
right? So if those of you who maybe have noticed me in other programs, as I get this quite often, like you see me in Bill's program, and Journey program, my questions are always relatively the same. Why do you ask that?
Mm.
And under what circumstances would that be relevant? Does it make sense? Because at the end of the day, what's going to be the determining factor for how skilled or successful you'll be at any given time is going to be, do you know the meaning or the reason behind what is being said? And can you replicate the result in a number of different circumstances,
Mm.
which determine your level of mastery?
Yeah, that's huge, man. I think that's a really great way to look at it because so many people just look at, right, you've given me this to say in this program or this script or this framework, so I'll just say it. And then maybe it lands, maybe it doesn't, and it's kind of up to the gods if it does, right? Like that seems to be the way most people go. So for you, what made you want to start asking that question? Like what was behind your reasoning of going, why are you asking this and where does that go?
Very good question. Very good question. So my way of thinking, when I was a kid, there are a few things I wanted to be in my life. I wanted to be a chef, which has not turned out very well. Matter of fact, me and my sister were just before I came on this call, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna buy me? I'm gonna buy me a rice cooker. She said, why? Because you can't make rice. I said, that's beside the point. So, so, so I wanted to be a chef. I wanted to be a detective, and I wanted to be a singer. That's what I wanted to do. So, over the years, the part of me that wanted to be a detective has kind of grown and matured over time. And
Mm.
so I ended up trying to, whenever I would get into a conversation with someone, I would talk to someone. I'm like, especially when you find someone who's really, really charismatic and really, really skilled, and you are not, the
Mm.
first thing you want to try to figure out is like, why is it that they are like that? And so I come from I'm a PK, I'm a preacher's kid. And so you'll be around these extraordinary communicators who are like making people fall out on the floor and run around into walls and clap and sing. And you're like, how are they doing this? And
Yeah.
they'll say it's the power of God, and there's a major truth in there, but there's also something hidden within their communication, how they're able to convey stories and metaphors and analogies and ideas in a way that inspires people to want to do things a certain way, right?
Mm.
What a lot of people don't understand is that language itself is just a tool to manage other people's emotional state,
Mm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Language is just a tool. A real powerful communicator is able to leverage his words to create selective thinking,
Mm.
right? To elicit or encourage emotions and to encourage mental images or imagination. Guess what the classical term for that is? It's called trance,
Right. Yeah.
right? So anytime a really this is a speaker, a preacher, a great conversationalist, this is a person on a day, this is anybody. If any person is able to use their words to create selective thinking just means that I'm only thinking about this one idea or this one conversation. This happens a lot. This happens a lot when you're in a really good conversation with someone, where the only thing you're focusing in on is the speaker. You're just kind of like absorbed in what they're saying. And then the emotional aspect of where the feeling kind of modulates and changes over time throughout the communication. First it was really, really serious. Now it's humorous. Now it's like sad. Now it's happy. You see what I'm saying? That
Yeah.
modulation of emotion that comes from that selective thinking. And then the imaginations, where you're creating mental pictures in your mind to be able to create words or phrases that can begin to move the conversation in a different direction. So I was always fascinated with that idea. I just didn't always have language for what it was I was looking at.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's interesting. So, I've got two kind of questions on that. The first one would be these people that were amazing communicators. How
Mhm.
often did you find they knew what they were doing versus they kind of had? So maybe a better way to say this would be how often were they able to articulate why versus how often were they kind of like, this is just what I do? Do you know what I mean? Like, did you find they've
Most
actively got there or that they kind of fell upon it?
most great communicators, most great communicators, um, most great communicators don't start off, they always start off with great communication like this. We have a pedigree behind them in a way,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
It's kind of like when you watch, like a great example of this is like The Rock.
Mm,
The
okay.
Rock, the People's Champion, right? WWE,
Right.
right? Rock has a pedigree of wrestlers in his past,
Mm,
right? And that pedigree now informs his way of thinking. Now,
mm,
here's what talent really is. Talent is um, it's just unconscious patterns, is what talent is.
right.
There are patterns that are being run that were either genetic or innate that were passed down. And they're running those patterns on over time. They just don't know they're doing it.
Hmm.
So a really great person like me, like a person like me, who doesn't necessarily have that skill, now has to use things apart from that to try to
Hmm.
understand what is being done,
Right.
right? So in my case, unfortunately, you don't always have like the physical tools to kind of understand like, oh, this is tone, this is space, this is time. Oh, he's modulating. Oh, he's using, embedded commands. You don't always have that skill, those tools available to you. So what ends up happening is that you end up doing what is called modeling or embodiment,
Hmm.
which is you're acting as if you are that person, and then see if you can pick up on what is being done. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So for me, when I first started, the person I used to imitate all the time was TD Jakes, Bishop Jakes.
Yeah.
Amazing communicator. And so I would walk around in my suit, or suit at home, and I would pretend to be TD Jakes. And then over time I would pretend to be Tony Robbins and so on and so forth. And then what happens over time is you start picking up on certain things at work.
Yeah.
Like there's a video of me somewhere out there pretending to be Tony Robbins. I had just got hired for an event to speak. And I was like, and I'm telling you, it's gonna be great. It's like, and so it's like there's a video out there somewhere of me doing that. But the idea that I was trying is I didn't have the tools. The only thing that I had at the time was I had my imagination, my ability to
Yeah.
pretend to act as if I was someone. And then some of those things begin to stick over time, and then certain things begin to drop off over time,
Yeah.
which I get this question a lot, which has to do with what is authentic communication.
Mm.
Authentic communication is that you try something from someone else, certain things stuck,
Mhm.
other things did not. And then over time, you keep using it over and over and until you develop a style. There's a compilation of things. That is all
Interesting.
your.
I like that. I also liked what you said earlier. I've not heard talent being described in a way that you just described it, right? Where I've obviously always heard the terms like natural talent, and he's got a talent for this and all that sort of stuff, clearly, but I've never heard it described in the way that it is unconscious patterns that have been passed on.
Hmm.
Because what's actually interesting about that is it actually gives you hope that you can develop the talent as well, right? Rather than it being an excuse as to why that person's better, I guess this is where you're coming from, right? It becomes a thing that you can model to become the same. So I imagine that's where you came from with the questions of why are you saying that? It's like maybe that person has a natural talent, but I can learn that talent then.
Exactly
That's
right. If you
interesting.
think about your genetic structure is housed with information. It's
Mm,
just information, like little pockets of information is what that is. And then information has to be reprinted, right? From both sides. It has to be reprinted. Well, some of those things are the talents, the skills, and abilities of the people in the past,
yeah.
right? So you grow up having a natural affinity for certain things. You don't know why you have a natural affinity for them. As a matter of fact, there was a study done years ago where it was dealing with the implantation of people's organs, right? Not to get really gross, but what they would do is like, let's say that a child had a weak heart. And what they would do is, let's say they found a donor's a heart for the child. When they transplanted that heart into the child, all of a sudden the child will have memories of things that weren't theirs.
Yeah.
It's because the life of the body is in the blood. And guess what's in the blood? Your genetic information.
Yeah.
So they will have memories and have dreams and things they didn't know that they knew, but it was from the other person. You follow?
It's crazy.
So it's like these skills and patterns and abilities are always there. It's just that you need tools, you need resources to figure them out. And if the natural can't tell you, it is be up to you now to try to figure out how to create that on your own, which
Mm,
is the reason why acting as if it's so important. You'll get a lot of things by you'll get a lot of things by playing around than you ever would just by trying to figure it all out.
yeah.
That's the reason why kids are so smart, right? But all they're doing is playing around.
Yeah, yeah. There's no concern about not becoming or not figuring it out. It's just try it out and see what happens, right? Whereas we start to go, well, if I try this and it doesn't work, maybe I won't try it, and then you never grow. So
Yep.
that's interesting, man. I like obviously with a couple of those people you mentioned that obviously, TD Jakes and Tony Robbins and these sort of people. How have you found because they're great speakers. How have you
Mhm.
found modeling some of that or taking some of what they're doing and putting it into a sales scenario, right? So, obviously, in our industry specifically, we don't present right as much. We more ask questions. It's more like a coaching session. How have you
Mhm.
found that translates, or have you not modeled those aspects and you've modeled different aspects of their talking?
Very good. Very good. So there are building blocks of communication, I would say. One of the most important building blocks within communication is knowing who it is that you're speaking with.
Mm,
Now, it doesn't matter who the communicator is. One of the first jobs of that communicator, if they're going to deliver well, is they have to know who it is that they're talking to.
mm,
Because depending upon who they're talking to will determine what stories or analogies or types of commands and things that they're going to be using, right? It's because what I find happens with a lot of people is that they're trying to use general tactics,
mhm.
hoping that they'll work with every person. And here's a big secret. Every sales process works some of the time.
Yeah.
Okay. Every sales process works some of the time. The way to make it more effective or to make it work more of the time is calibration, understanding the person before you.
Mm, yeah.
Okay. It's like martial arts, right?
Mm,
All techniques work some of the time, but depending upon your level of mastery and understanding and the context that you are in will determine whether or not the technique you're about to employ will work or not work.
mm,
It's like for a period of time, they didn't think that traditional Taekwondo would work in the UFC, and then somebody did it. You see, it was this level of understanding about his craft and his understanding of the situation that he was in that made him successful. I can't remember what that guy's name what is, but I'll look it up and tell you later. But anyway, so like the first thing is the first step, the first kind of building block that you'll get from really, really great communicators is they understand who they're talking to, whether they're talking to business owners, whether they're talking to stay-at-home moms, where they're talking to high level like CEOs, like they have a good understanding or grasp about who that person is and what they're actually looking for. The
Yeah.
second thing is that they have an understanding about the mood of the person that they're talking to. The real truth of the matter is that people will only make decisions when they feel like it,
Yeah.
right? If all decisions are state dependent, then the goal will be to make sure that you're monitoring the state
Mm.
of the person
Yeah.
before you.
Yeah.
And depending upon the state that the person that you're in will determine whether you need to do a bit more work or they're ready to take action. I was watching this video on Shark Tank, and the salesperson was trying to make this pitch on Shark Tank. And he just kept talking and talking and talking. And then Mark Cuban stopped him. He said, "I'm out." And the guy was like, "You know what? You know what's going on?" He said, "This is the most fundamental lesson you need to learn as a salesperson, is that you need to know when to stop talking and ask for the sale."
Mm.
What the salesperson lacked is he lacked the ability to perceive when the person had been bought in or not. He didn't understand the mood.
Yeah.
You follow what I'm saying? He couldn't pick that up. And a lot of salespeople don't. They don't know when the person is actually genuinely interested, when there's a congruency in the words that they say and the body language and things that they are exhibiting at the time. I was watching a guy's call recently, and he's like, tell me what do you feel like went wrong with the call? And so I watched the call, and the first thing I said was there was no ecstatic yes about that call.
Mm.
It was always an okay.
Mm. Right.
There was no indication that he was completely bought into what you said. He was just always, oh, maybe it will, maybe it won't. And so because that wasn't there, you could have done everything that wouldn't have worked,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because he didn't understand the mood. Follow? So that'll be the second thing. The second thing is just the third thing would be once you have that, is that when you're in a conversation with a person, there's a feedback loop
Mm.
between you and that person, right? There's a feedback loop. And if you have not trained yourself to maintain your frame or status on a call, you can begin to succumb to a lot of things that come from the other party. Let me give you an example of that. A lot of salespeople have a hard time talking to people who are high level.
Right.
It's because they have not done the hard work of learning how to maintain the state in a calm and neutral manner,
Mm.
right? And so we develop language. Here's another thing too. So we have to develop languaging for things that are really emotional based. They haven't learned how to maintain themselves.
Mm.
You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Language itself is a powerful tool. Don't get me wrong. But all the language in the world won't do you any good if you can't maintain who you are,
Mm. Yeah.
right? Why are there so many words and phrases to say the same thing? It's because each context and each emotional state in which the word is encountered is different.
Mm.
So am I happy or am I ecstatic? Am I angry or am I furious? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The idea is the same, but the context, the emotional context behind it is different,
Yeah.
right? So you
Yeah.
need more than just so kind of go back. So you have to know who your audience is, right? You have to begin to be cautious about your own emotional state,
Hmm.
right? You have to begin to build the connection with the other person.
Mm.
There's a saying which was um, rapport is the glue that holds trance together. All really good communication is trance induced.
Mm.
All great communicators is trance inducers. They're trance inducers.
Right.
You're listening to them, and they are the only thing that they are the only thing that you're listening to at that time.
Yeah.
They have all your focus and all your attention. They're trance inducers, right? But the glue that holds that together is rapport, the connection, the similarity between you and that person.
Yeah.
Either who they are, either it's like I'm connected to who you are, or I'm connected to who I want to be in you.
Yeah. Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then it's language. These are your stories, your embedded commands, and all those kinds of things. Your language tools that you use as a means to convey the emotions that you want to say, be able to get the information that you need. So those are like the three or four building blocks that the whole thing that you kind of get from looking at master communicators.
Awesome. That's really interesting. So I think where I see a lot of people struggle with throughout those, I mean, obviously everyone will struggle in different places, but I think most people would go, well, I know who I'm talking to because my offer helps with this or the business sells this, right? But I see people get the general gist, but then they don't be present with the actual person, right? So, for example, if you're selling like business services, you could be having someone who's turning over a couple of million for the last few years on the call, or you could have someone who's got two clients, right? Because it's actually that wide. So,
Right.
how do you kind of feel out the type of person you're talking to? Like, is it by you're asking certain questions right off the top, and again, I know this is generic, right? But is it more that side, or are you pretty in tune with people and pretty empathetic so you can pick things up? Or how would you say you kind of figure that out?
Okay, so for me personally, I've just done it so long that I can just kind of pick up. And to be fair, most people have that. I think everyone does, to be fair, with the very, very few exceptions.
Hmm.
People who just do not have the ability to empathize because they don't have the neurological circuitry to do so. But there are very few of those people in the world,
Okay.
right? Now, the question comes down to is like, how do you deliberately
Hmm.
figure that out? One of the ways in which you can do it is by listening to the words and phrases that they are using.
Hmm.
Language, language has a structure and a hierarchy. And depending upon how they are using language will give you insight into the way they think.
Okay.
Let me give you an example. And he's like, Pierre, that is very, very fascinating. What do you mean by that? So like, so so for example, if I were to ask a question like, if I ask a question like, how does a person get a cold? They'll say, well, people in the world are disease-ridden degenerates, that sneezing all over things, kids ain't covering their mouths, freaking government, it's like, and then somebody said, well, that's one person. Then the other person is like, oh, well, you have to make sure you're working out, taking care of yourself, nutrition, fitness, those kinds of things.
Hmm.
What that just revealed is their locus of control.
Mm. Right.
Are they a external where everything is outside of their control? Are they internal? This just has to do with me,
Hmm.
right? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's like I understand by those few things, I'm able to determine where the locus of control is. Now, I probably wouldn't ask it on the call. But if you ask a question like, what do you feel like is the main reason why you didn't get the result that you were
Hmm.
after,
Yeah.
right? And they say, oh, it's the company is garbage and
Yeah.
giving the training and support and it's terrible. Okay. And you say, well, I can appreciate you sharing that with me, and I do thank you for that. But did anyone else get any results in that program? Well, yeah, somebody did. Oh, they did they? Okay, well, why do you think they got their result, but you weren't able to get the result that you were after? And then it's like, oh, it's because of this. And it could be
Hmm.
completely ridiculous. You're like, well, it still didn't give them enough support. But most
Hmm.
often, more than not, it'll be the locus of control will shift, and they'll be like, well, I didn't have enough time. I did this, I did that, but I didn't do the other things. Does that make
Hmm.
sense? So you listen. So locus of control. Another way you can do this is like another example of this is like when you look at a person and as you're talking to the person, you find that they're leaning on certain kinds of words.
Right.
For example, strength or powerful or great.
Hmm.
They're leaning more on certain kinds of words that deal with strength or power, which means they're more inclined to resonate with language that has to do with strength or power as opposed to weakness.
Hmm. Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you're listening, you're paying attention to, you're asking questions, but you're paying attention to what is being said and how it is being said. It's not just a matter of listening to the words, it's listening to the emotional emphasis on the words that are being said. So let's
Yeah.
say I gave you a list. And I said, you say, hey Pierre, what do you really, really, why are you really, really here? Like, what's really behind you looking to take this action? I said, well, my main focus right now is that I want to be able to give her a new car. I want to go to her house, and I really want to, take care of my family.
Hmm.
Which one had the stronger emphasis?
Hmm.
The family one did, didn't it?
Hmm. Yeah.
So guess what I'm going to be spending my time talking about?
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about family. You see
Hmm.
what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the goal would be to figure some of these things out is look at the person,
Mm.
look at what they're trying to get you to understand about them. Everyone is projecting. Everyone is.
Mhm.
I'm projecting right now. Okay. Figure out what do they want me to know about them? What is important to them?
Yeah.
And then just give it to them.
Yeah. 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 That makes a lot of sense. That's very much in alignment with how I kind of look at things and how I try and work with people. For
Mm,
yourself, when it comes to, obviously, let's say they give you the language and it looks like an external locus of control, right? So
mm,
they are potentially releasing some responsibility or ownership of the situation, right? Do you, in that moment, do you try and challenge that, or do you take them through a process in the call where you start to question it in a different way? I know you did does someone else get results and things, but let's say
mm,
it's not landing. They're not changing their language throughout the call. It still feels like there's
mm,
an external there. Is
mm.
your goal to get them to take an internal, or is it just to expose it, or what? How do you kind of look for those to challenge, I guess?
So there are three kinds of things you want to kind of cycle through at any given time on a call: urgency, ownership, and commitment.
Mm, yeah.
Three kind of things you want to kind of hit on at any given call: urgency, ownership, and commitment. Is this important now? Okay. Is this something that you want to achieve? Is this something that's just nice to have? Or is it something that you absolutely want?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you choose this for yourself? Or is this something that just be maybe somebody else can get? I don't know. Right. So if I'm in a call with a person and I'm sensing there's a lot of externalization on the call, then my goal will then begin to get them to accept that this is something that they actually want.
Mhm.
And then ask them, do you choose to get this? Is this something that you want to have? Right. So there's the future pacing. So let's say I'm at the top of the call and I'm asking about, and I was like, let me ask you this question. Do you feel like that what you're doing will get you where you want to be? And do you feel like it'll get you there as fast as you would like to get there? Yes, I do. Why do you feel like you can? Okay, well, I feel like that because of this and the third and the XYZ. Okay, great. But why do you feel like that now's the time for you to take action to make this work, as opposed to just kind of kicking the can down the road or maybe doing or doubling down on something that you've already done? Well, because of X and Y and Z. So let's say we're now in this part where I've heard them mention that they're in different kinds of programs, so they tried different programs before. So that I've already done it the first time is, do you feel like that now is the time
Mhm.
to take action? Now the second time, we're doing our second run. So what programs have you looked into? What has been the result with those? Okay, so with that being said, why is it that some people got the results but you didn't?
Mhm.
Oh, because of X, Y, and Z. Okay, so do you feel like that there's something that we need to change,
Mhm.
or do you feel like there's something that needs to stay the same?
Mhm.
It's something I need to change. Why do you feel like now is the time to change it though? Right? So urgency, ownership, and commitment.
Mhm.
Now, if you were to design a solution, my friend, to get you X, Y, Z result, what would that solution look like?
Mhm.
Right? So I'm getting them to tell me, right? Because
Mhm.
any words or phrases they are using, they can't dispute. Which is the reason why people get upset, like in narratives like that. But you said, it's like the ABC, right? I know what I said. I know what I said. I know what I said. Okay. It's because that's how different from. So it's like it's very, very difficult for us to go against our own criteria and values.
Mhm.
So if I give you a checklist and you give me that checklist back, it's very, very difficult for me to turn around and say, oh, that's not what I meant.
Mhm.
Or that's not what it was. Because you gave it to me.
Yeah.
This is the checklist you gave me. Follow?
Yeah.
So that's another level of ownership. Now we're in future pacing or vision and desire, however we want to call it, right?
Mhm.
And now it says, so let's say that we were to work hand in hand with you and you got this result. Okay, it's like 4 months down the line, and you now have the result that you were after. What does it allow you to do personally? Personally being the operative word, taking ownership
Yeah.
of that thing. Because it's now mine. Okay.
Mhm.
Now the next part has to do with consequence. So now we've already done the levels, like 3 or 4 levels down in this case, right?
Yep.
And so now we're in consequence. And so the major question is going to become like, what if you decide to not doing anything different?
Mm.
But the big question is like, this may be a ridiculous question for you. I always like to say something like that. Personal question, ridiculous question.
Mhm.
Because I remember I would ask certain questions like this is a kind of a stupid question to ask. And so I just say it. This may sound like a ridiculous question,
Mhm.
but is that something that you're willing to settle for?
Yeah.
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 And then finally at the end, the pièce de résistance, right? Which is like, do you feel like do you feel like that is on you to make this change possible?
Mm.
Or do you feel like this is offset to someone else?
Mm.
Like, is this on you? Is this your responsibility? Or is this somebody else's responsibility? No, this is my responsibility. Is that something that you're willing to accept? Yes. Okay. Well, based on what you shared, and now go on into that.
Yeah.
So the idea is that we want to stay present. And the reason why a lot of people can't be present is because they're doubting themselves and what they know.
How so? Hey, explain that.
Think about when you tie your shoes. Like most people can tie their shoes and hold a full conversation and eat a cheeseburger at the same time because they've done the tying of the shoes 1,000 times.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to sales calls, or really any form of like formal established communication where there's a result to be had, they
Mm.
begin to start being more internal because they are doubting what they know.
Mm.
They haven't done it enough. They haven't developed the neurological connections and certainty
Mm.
necessary to be able to be external. A really great communicator, once they've done their due diligence, is all external, right? They're paying
Yeah.
attention to what's out here in the world. But these
Yeah.
are where your answers are out here in the world, not
Mm.
in here. You see? But
Yeah.
if you ever dealt with a conversation where the conversation feels cold, like it's not going anywhere, it's
Mm.
because the communicator is in here, not out there.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
see?
Yeah. How do you, so obviously doing reps is one way to strengthen that, right? Like you said, tying your shoelace, you do that just because you do it so many times.
Mhm.
This might be a two-part question. One, how do people become more um, in sales that way? Is it just the reps? Is my first question. The second one is the influx of the amount of coaching frameworks, different tactics that does that make people question their ability? So it can take them into their heads, if that makes sense. Because there's so many, because let's say we're scrolling through Facebook, right? And I'm like, okay, my framework's this, I'm following this process. And then you see the new person who's just come out, who's getting a big following, say something which kind of doesn't contradict, right? But it says something, and you're like, maybe I should do that. How big an impact do you feel that has on the industry for people to actually get this mastery to where they need to be? So that's my two
So,
questions.
so ask them two questions again. So the first question has to do with how do you become more certain or confident in your process, right?
Yep.
And then the second question has to do with, do I feel like that the marketing processes are are interfering with a person's mastery? Is that the
Yeah. Do you
question?
do you
Or
feel that that can impact that person's confidence, I guess?
I think the biggest problem with most salespeople is the fact they haven't figured out what problems they actually have,
Mm.
right? A guy reached out to me over Facebook, and he was asking me about the training that you and I went through, which is Bill Walsh's training. It was about objections, and he says, um, "Hey, do you feel like that? Bill's training uh, was very, very meaningful for your objection handling skills?" And I thought it was a very strange question to ask me.
Mm.
And so I responded by saying, "I said, I get this question all the time. Why do you think that is?" And it's saying, well, I don't know about everyone else, but for me, it's the fact of, I want to know if it'll be worth me investing into. As it stands right now, I'm this kind of person, and I don't know if he'll work for. I don't know if his strategies, the way he does things, will work well for me. I said, "Have you ever heard of the law of compensation?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, you're gonna love this. The law of compensation states that you will be paid in proportion to the value that you can create for someone else. And value will always be determined by the quality of problem solved,
Mm.
right? So the question I need to ask you is, do you feel like that you even need help with objection handling?
Mm.
His answer to me was no. And he goes on to talk about he has a friend who has who he's working with, who's helping him out and a few other things and exposed to the programs and that kind of stuff. I said, well, in that case, then Bill's program won't help you at all
Mm.
because it will provide no value because it solves no problem,
Mhm.
right? So most sales professionals who are investing in training have not done the hard work of tracking what problems they actually have. So
Mhm.
then they get into a sales process, they get into a new process or something like that. And now they're trying to solve problems that weren't problems to begin with. Does that make sense?
A lot of sense.
I've seen people message me from time to time and they ask me about different programs. It's like they'll ask me for help. And I said, weren't you in so and so's program? Like, yeah, I just got out of that. I said, what was missing from that? Oh, I didn't get a chance to really take advantage of it. What do you mean you didn't take advantage of it? It's because they went in, but
Mm.
they weren't clear about the problem that they needed to have solved,
Mm. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So if you don't know what problems you have, how do you know when you'll solve them? You
Mm.
won't, right? So I think that the part of the equation about getting into mastery of a process outside of doing the physical things about doing reps is understanding what you're saying and why.
Mm.
There is there's something called Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy is the hierarchy for which we deal with learning. The further up you go, the stronger the learning will be.
Mhm.
Okay. The more involved the learning will be. The farther down you go, the less learning you're actually doing. So, for example, most people are really, really big on memorization. But if you look at Bloom's taxonomy, Bloom's memorization is at the very bottom.
Right.
It's the lowest form of learning there is. So, what will be the highest form of learning? The highest form of learning will be discussion and comparison. So
Mm.
let's say I have two questions. Let's say you're using like a Jeremy Miner's question, which is like, do you like the system of process that you're using to get XYZ result? Versus maybe like a Bill Walsh, which would be something like, with what you have in place right now, do you feel like that process can get you to where you like to be as fast as you like to get there? Now, if
Mhm.
I'm looking at these two questions, they're still designed to accomplish the same goal, but which one would be better for me? You see what I'm
Mhm.
saying?
Yeah.
And you
Mhm.
see, so most people don't do that kind of work. So then they
Mm.
get into sales calls and they're just rattling off things. I got into this quote unquote argument one time with a friend, and he's like, you know what bothers me about you? I said, what is that? He said, y'all got to question everything. He said, I just like just give me the stuff and I just go do it. I said, I just don't work that way. I don't work that way. I can't work that way. I said, it's like driving a car with no freaking engine. Okay, so it's like so the first thing is that you need to understand what problems you're trying to solve, and
Mhm.
you need to develop a bit of understanding. Yes, memorization can do a lot for you in sales because sales is like learning a completely different language. If you're
Mm.
going to a different country, you want to be able to live there, it will probably be beneficial for you to understand the language and the syntax that goes along with along with that country. Sales is exactly the same.
Mm.
Unfortunately, however, is that you can learn a whole bunch of words and phrases, but don't know the context that they should be in.
Mm.
What I'm saying?
Yep.
So if I'm talking, let's say I'm talking to let's say I'm talking to a high level CEO. I may not need to use consequence questions because they already have a decision making process that's been verified by them.
Mhm. Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But a person would know that if they haven't had the time to ask those questions. Why would I ask this question, and in what context would this
Mhm.
question land?
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You don't need to use every question every time, but you need to have access to all questions to know what to ask at what time.
Yeah. 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 I agree with that. I think it's yeah, I like to say that sales skills is like a toolbox, isn't it? And it's knowing that the efficiency of the tools that you use is based on the knowledge of what job you're doing. So
Right.
if I'm gonna hang a painting, I need a hammer and a nail, right? I don't need a screwdriver. But if I didn't realize that, I might pick up the screwdriver. And I think sales is the same thing. I think they
Mhm.
get all these tools, and then we're kind of just thrown into it sometimes, and we just go, "Oh, I've got to use this one now." And it's like, "Well, why are you using that one?" It's like, "Well, that comes after this one, right?" You're like, "Not always." It's based on
Mhm.
the conversation. So no, I like that. I agree with that. One thing I want to ask. I know we're coming up towards the end, so again, I want to honor your time. But one thing that obviously, anytime I see you post, and then all throughout this conversation as well, you use a lot of um, what would I call it? Just a lot of different language patterns, right? A lot of different context, a lot of different, like you mentioned, like the hierarchies. You throw in a lot of NLP things. You do all this side, like for yourself. It feels like from when I interact with you, you have done a lot of external work purely on like just communication as a whole. You know, even you talk about trance, which is obviously, you know, leads into hypnotism and those sort of things, right? Like for you, like what makes you, I know mastery is probably the answer, but like what makes you dig into all these different things? Because there's a lot of people out there that just go, I'm
Oh,
just going to learn this process and I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. you know
I think the answer will probably shock a lot of people. The reason why I say so many things is because I'm trying to help myself,
mm,
right? The best form of communication, or the most important form of communication, is to be able to communicate with yourself,
mm,
right?
mm,
So like learning about trends and how you learn and different ways of asking certain questions comes from my own journey to try to figure out how best to communicate with me to do the things I really, really want to do. Does that make
right.
sense?
Yeah.
So, for example, when I started learning about like what are called using adjectives in words, use adjectives in phrases, I didn't know that when you use adjectives in words, it provides you the brain of the hearer with a chemical dosage every time you use them. And
Right.
so the more you stack before a command
Mm,
increases the kind of the kind of the a kinship or desire to fulfill that command.
mm,
I didn't learn about that until I was trying to figure out how you structure suggestions or affirmations.
right.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
When I started figuring out, people talk about flow and all those kinds of stuff, being more productive. But those are questions like, how do you make that work? When I figured it out was that is that flow is just another form of trance. Is what it is, right? It's just another form of trance. But I didn't know that until I started asking the questions of
Mm,
how does this apply across multiple situations? You see what I'm saying?
mhm. Yep.
The idea about learning. I was struggling with understanding sales and how it worked. And I was just like, man, there's got to be an easier, better way to do this than just like rote memorization. Like, how do I develop an ability to be to talk around the same idea while still getting to where I want to be? That's when
Mm,
I started realizing that language wasn't as important as most marketers made it out to be,
okay.
right?
Yeah.
Now, there are certain principles that you can
Mhm.
use in anything that you say, but for by and large, as I said before, all sales structures work some of the time. The goal is to be able to be more focused on the person you're speaking with, which will determine what you need to be saying, right?
Yeah.
So all that didn't come out until I was trying to figure out how to do this for myself. Okay, so I'm studying hypnosis, I'm studying sales, I'm studying NLP, I'm studying this. How do I understand this better and
Mm,
faster, right? And when I started figuring those things out, that's when I discovered Bloom's taxonomy.
right.
You see, so all of these things that you hear me say and do, they'll come out of me trying to solve internal problems. Danko said it best. He says, solve your own problems first, and then see if other people have the same problem and show you how you did it.
Mm, I like that. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Well, I think that's probably a great place to leave it for today. Um, yeah, it's been really interesting. I knew this would be a good one. I knew you'd have a lot of good things for me here. But I appreciate your insights on this, and I always love seeing everything you post and all the conversations you hold. Again, I think the alignment from my side, we seem to view the world in a similar way, which probably is no coincidence, right? I grew up also mimicking a lot of preachers and things
Mm.
like that, right? And like Yeah, like I used to when I was like a little kid, I used to put all my cuddly toys there and I used to hold a sermon, right? When I was like 5.
Mm, wow.
Right. So it's but I find anyone who's involved in that world,
Mhm.
preaching, speaking, all that, they there's a lot of communication that you pick up. Like, so my analogies nowadays are like I can pick analogies out of the air, but I find that comes from a lot of sermons, right? Because they always used to bring that in.
Oh, man. Do you remember when Bill I had used the seed time and harvest? Uh the
What's
seed
that
time and
mean?
harvest metaphor with Bill. And Bill's like, what the hell are you talking about, man? He said,
So funny.
he said,
It's it's
nobody's playing anything, man. He said, try something else, like cars or something like this. Okay, it's fine.
but you do, don't you? You just connect those ones.
Bill, this is what this is. He's like, no, I'm thinking, do something